Billy. How you doing?
Hi.
Well, I'm enjoying myself. It's a nice day, just letting that sun shine on my shoulders like old John Denver.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good too. I'm actually having a pretty good day.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that, Billy. Oh, those people that are after you aren't bothering you, are they? Oh, I know that sometimes they can come after you. That's just crazy.
Oh, I wish you wouldn't have brought that up. I forgot all about it for a while. I was starting to feel pretty good.
Crazy, crazy, crazy. I hate it when that happens. Oh, I'm sorry, Billy. Oh, well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's anything I can do. If I go after him, then I'll get in trouble. And if I don't do anything at all, then I don't know, it'll just make me feel hopeless.
Well, regular old targeted individual. Darned if you do and darned if you don't. I know what I'd do. I'll tell you what I'd do. I go get myself a gun. I take care of it right now. You don't want to be a coward, do you, Billy?
If I do that, I could get in trouble, or maybe even shot by the police or in prison. I was having a good day. I don't really want to talk about this. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, how long you been doing this, Billy?
They've been stalking me for 15 years.
Well, I don't know, Billy. I'm not trying to be mean, but you're kind of a freak now. They done scrambled your brains like scrambled eggs. You don't have a woman. You're old enough to own your own house now. You ain't even got a rental. I'll tell you, you ain't got no friends. I'm your buddy, but usually people have a little bit more going on. What if they drive you crazy, Billy, and you don't have a chance to get them? What if they drive you so crazy you hurt someone you don't want to hurt, Billy?
Well, I don't know. I really wish you wouldn't have brought this up.
Well, in this video, we're going to deal with the infiltrator, the agitator, that one. Whether female or male, it's going to get in there and sow their seeds of destruction, gain your trust, be that synchronized attacker with the guys with the mask, the wolf in sheep's clothing. And as far as that conversation with Billy, well, I'm going to have to side with him for now. It's just not a solution to do something radical. I've talked about that before in videos, that targeted individuals are pushed. And, if you're one of those targeted individuals who's getting harassment in a lot of different locations, you get put in jail or in a mental facility or something, your options, well, they're even more limited. You don't want that. You don't want them to have control. You don't want to be needy. You're already needy enough. That's another strategy of the Gangstalking. They want you needy. They get you isolated and everything. And the infiltrator will take advantage of that, right? I know that it makes me vulnerable. And there's a couple different ways you can play your game, okay? If you have a lot of emotional energy, you might not want to isolate yourself, okay? And I've talked about the fact that these people, they're condemning themselves. Okay, it's not good to, get off on it or whatever, but sometimes I'll just, if you're that, hell-bent on doing this, I'll oblige you, because I know that you're not going to get me, okay? But there's those times where you're emotionally drained, and it's just coming from so many different angles, man. And, your strategy might change. You might want to isolate yourself. You might want to protect yourself. Because, they will chip away at you. And I know a lot of you guys are dealing with synchronicities, and that can happen in a lot of different ways, okay? Sometimes it's activity that involves, the time of day or whatever, or a geographical location or something like that. I've heard of targeted individuals, especially ones that are living in apartments and stuff like that. They'll move into different areas of their dwelling and they'll hear, thumps or something, or someone will do something, maybe start hacking or coughing. Depends on what kind of opportunities are there, how thin the walls are and stuff like that. It might be when you're going to sleep. Or there was one guy, every time he went into his bathroom, he would have to sit on the toilet though, okay? As soon as he sat down on the toilet, boom, And it happened every time. And of course, what's the suggestion with little games like somebody's watching you, right? It's creepy. It's unnerving, and they want you that way. They want that kind of trauma in your mind, so you start processing information differently. They want to scramble up your brain and get you nervous and dysfunctional, all that stuff. There was one guy, he was talking about every time he wakes up, something happens. Somebody, knocks on the ceiling or throws something at his wall or whatever. I've had that happen. I've had things like that happen. And I'm not really talking about that kind of synchronicity though, okay? That when you walk outside, there's that guy, smoking the cigarette looking at you. And it's every day at the same time. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's even more unexplainable than that. It's every time you just decide to go out randomly, even if it's 2 a.m. and there they are staring and watching you. Weird. What do you do? What I'm talking about is the infiltrator. And the infiltrator is going to be there, to kind of get you going or to sow the seeds of destruction in your mind. Gain your trust, like they're your friend or whatever. Kind of keep you on that fringe where you don't know if you can or not. But of course you're lonely, you want a friend. And they know how to play that game to where they'll lift you up in just the right moments and be there with the hammer, when you're vulnerable. But, I used to have a lot of friends. I used to have a lot of people around me. I used to have 20 people over at my house. It was a revolving door. Before all this started, I had a lot of people that I hung out with. Some of the people were there just to smoke my pot. You're always going to deal with that, but whatever, I did the same thing sometimes, but I had a lot of people that I hung out with, and the thing is, when I think back, when all this stuff started, and I've mentioned this a lot, that I think at the root this stuff is spiritual. I know some of you guys are dealing with the government thing. I know you're dealing with, people in secret societies and other things, and people that are rich and people with resources. And you can't separate that, okay? Because one of the first things that pops into your mind is, gosh, this stuff would require some resources, right? I talked to one guy. He said that people were driving by him on the road with government plates and all this stuff. And, how is this possible? Hundreds of miles away from where he lives and everything. And things like that will happen. And you don't know how to process it. When you first start experiencing this stuff, you don't know what to think. And, it is a lot more aggressive. And sometimes it'll last for years. I know for me, it went on hot and heavy for about 2 or 3 years. It was different. The world was different back then. The internet was different. Security systems were a lot more expensive. I was just, a little dude that, was delivering pizza. I didn't have a whole lot of money, and it just all hit me at once. And it was kind of crazy. And I didn't know what to think. But the point I'm getting at is all of a sudden people were affected. I've been thinking about making a whole video of what to look for, but I'll kind of go into it now to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about and what I'm not talking about, because the infiltrator is going to be one of those people that are not just affected spiritually, like a little puppet all of a sudden overcome or whatever, and that can happen. They have more of an intent, but I've seen that, okay? I've had people, like I said, I had a lot of people coming over, and then it would, become kind of weird, where they would start showing up at weird times and start acting funny, almost like they're forgetful, or uncoordinated. They wouldn't be able to light a cigarette all of a sudden. They might get twitches in their eye or whatever. They would just be acting funny and almost scared after the whole thing got over, as if they didn't know where they were. And they would, I gotta go. I don't know. Yeah, okay, I'll see you later. And then they're the kind of person that would hang out for hours at your house, and all of a sudden they come over and they're sitting there, and all of a sudden they get twitchy on you, and they look spaced out or complacent, and then you start talking about stuff and get weird and kind of moving around and being unorthodox, and they'll come out of it and they'll be like, oh, I gotta go. I don't know what's going on. And you're like, what the hell's going on? And you could tell something is affecting these people, but you don't know what's going on because it's come from all these different angles. But the infiltrator, well, they're going to be a little bit more purposeful, right? I had one guy that I dealt with, and he just flat out said it one time. It's always something to where you're starting to gain your morale, you're starting to feel better. you're starting to, your mood is lifting. You're forgetting about things just for a while, if nothing else. And that's important for a targeted individual, because the whole idea is to keep you in that funk, to keep you in that place where you're worried about this stuff all the time, and it just chip away at your sanity. And this, all of a sudden, I was in one of those moods where I was okay, I was feeling great, and knock, knock, knock on the door. There he comes. And I'm like, oh, and at first this guy was really cool and everything, but then it started to go bad, and I could see something was going on, and here they are. And so I'm like, okay. And back then it was hot and heavy, so I knew there was going to be more, right? I knew it wouldn't just be him, because I figured I could deal with that. And of course, here comes the phone calls and the weird messages on the machine. And he's just sitting there looking at me with this cheesy grin on his face. And he goes, oh, that sure is funny, isn't it? Just when you were starting to feel good. Huh. It's almost like they know. I mean, this guy was coming out of the closet to where he was basically admitting that this stuff was going on. And I'd never said anything to him about anything, right? And you'll have those people. Or, they'll be more covert, and they'll be involved in your life. And, and of course, it could be the opposite. Instead of you being in a good mood, it could be one of those times where you just get hit from all angles. And you're just trying to keep your morale. You're trying to, stop processing all this information and stay in the now and just do what you're supposed to do. And you're kind of depressed. Well, how you doing? Oh, yeah. It's a beautiful day, and I'm sorry you're feeling like that. What are we going to do about it? And of course, then you get drawn into that conversation where now you got to solve everything, right? And but the flip side to it is, you could be honest and then get drawn into that kind, but then you got to lie. So now you got to be phony all the time, right? And then you're at that crossroads where you're like, I don't know which is worse. Right, so I could be honest, and I could get drawn into this thing, and I could get triggered or whatever, and go down that road where I'm going, and get frustrated, start thinking about all this stuff, or I could just turn into the Hollywood targeted individual and just act, And I think that's smart. Sometimes you got to do that, but everything either turns into a nightmare or a game, And I can see why the derealization process happens with targeted individuals, where they even start wondering if this stuff's even real, right? And that comes down to figuring out where you are in the first place, and all the spiritual activity that is around you, and how that is affecting people, and how it could be turned on and off. Because, and I've talked about this with other people before. They're like, "What is gangstalking?" And I'm like, "Well, you don't know what it is? No." Well, then it doesn't exist for you. It doesn't exist. What do you mean? Well, because if you're not affected by it, for all practical purposes, it really doesn't exist in your world. Because the people that are not affected by gangstalking, they don't deal with any of that stuff. It's literally like living in a different dimension. Because targeted individuals are dealing with that, and it's hidden. It's completely hidden, and it's so covert. And the demonic activity that is involved. They've been doing this stuff for so long. They've been doing it for thousands of years, that they can play this game so good that they can literally do it in plain sight, hide it from everybody, and people who are not affected by it, people who don't experience it, their world is going to be completely different. And for them, it isn't a reality. It's not. It might as well just, be a figment of the targeted individual's imagination at that point, because they're never going to see it, ever. And that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the thing about it. People who don't experience this stuff, you could try and tell them, and they're, what? Well, I've never seen anything like that. Are you trying to tell me that this stuff can happen to you, to where you're going and grocery stores or restaurants or wherever, and all of a sudden it's just going to come out of the woodwork, that people can literally be affected by the demonic realm, and or do they know what's going on? Well, some of them. Really? So you're saying that when I go out to eat, or when I do anything, that I'm literally surrounded, and that if I get targeted by this stuff? If I turn into a target individual, is going to be everywhere? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and they're not going to believe it because it's way too crazy to comprehend. And most of the targeted individuals who start this process of gangstalking, they don't know either. And that's why they come to the conclusion and start to compartmentalize this stuff, and they don't see the bigger picture, right? And then you get people who hyper-focus on one secret society or one group of people or one group of authority figures in society or whatever, and they forget that, this stuff goes beyond. Behind the curtain, the puppet masters, they can grab a hold of anybody. It's bigger than that. And it involves all kinds of things. It's crazy. The good news now is at least targeted individuals can get online and see that they're not alone. They can have some kind of affirmation. I didn't have anything. I didn't have anyone. I had no idea that anyone else in the world was experiencing this stuff at all. Zero. I mean, the only thing I had was, I would I would watch horror movies or something, and in a horror movie you have a lot of things like that where people will start to experience strange things, and no one else in the movie is. It's just them. They're the only ones experiencing all this weird stuff, and to me it was like, I don't know, whoever made this movie was trying to say something without saying it. Or there were like secret messages, that this stuff existed, that I couldn't be the only one in the world that was experiencing this stuff. And I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew it was real. I started to extrapolate. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I started to extrapolate things, but, there was just nothing there. And, that infiltrator and the other people that would do the same thing, well, they had a lot of influence, because you're very vulnerable, and, the susceptibility that the new target individual has for disinformation and that type of infiltration is ridiculous, because your support mechanisms are ripped out from underneath you. Everything is freaky. And at the same time, depending on what kind of street theater you're getting, you're pushing back on all this stuff, and you might even be dealing with covert druggings. You might be dealing with, different types of demonic attack or electronic harassment. And, even if you don't believe you're crazy, you start to get driven that way. And you become super vulnerable. And I think that with, as far as the infiltration goes, I think it's when the targeted individual is being lifted in their spirits, right? It's when they start getting into that place where they have hope. Because you get online now and you see a lot of people talking about this. There's a lot of different stories. You're not going to go crazy. It's not in your mind. It's not the reptilians. You're dealing with people who are using electronic equipment. You're dealing with the demonic. You're dealing with deception. You're dealing with time dilation. You are dealing with things that are set up to drive you crazy. Sit back, be confident, and, just hold on. You can make it. And, you get into that place where you start to feel good. And that's when the infiltrator is going to come in. And there's probably more than one. If you've isolated yourself, you're just going to be dealing with the chain yankers, And I've done that. I've done it for a long time. I've done it for years and years. And, then you have other things, and they know it. I mean, there's a catch-22 to all these things. And when you isolate yourself and get alone, you got to decide which is worse. Like I said before, you can tell the truth and talk about this stuff with someone, which is going to get you going. And if you start playing games and be the Hollywood targeted individual, well, that has, effects to it. I mean, it's just like you can't win for losing. And you have to become this damage control expert, where you have to decide whether you want to become a hermit, isolate yourself, or just deal with it, It's like eating fish. You got to spit out the bones. And, even for a while, I got to the point where I was just like, hey, you guys want to play? I know what's going to happen. Okay, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I don't know the details and specifics, but I know it's not going to be good. If you want into this nightmare clown show from hell, I'll oblige you, because you're going to regret it. Whether it's sooner or later, you're going to regret it. But that gets old. It's never fun to play that game. You can try to make it fun, but I think the worst part about the infiltrator, and I've only had this happen with a handful of individuals, because usually when you're dealing with an infiltrator, you figure it out, about halfway through, but you're just not sure, right? You're like, something's going on here, and you kind of back off. You kind of put up some barriers. You kind of protect your heart a little bit, You got a little armor on. You see something is a little off, and you're not sure. But there's a handful of individuals I've dealt with. I never, ever in a million years would have guessed that they were part of, that they were on the other side. Never would have guessed it, And it can be people that are holding, positions like pastor or counselor or something like that, or maybe even, your boss or something at work that gains your confidence or whatever. And they have a lot of power because they can, give you hours to work, or they can give you that raise, or, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of mechanisms that go into this, and there's a lot of ways that people can play the targeted individual. And a lot of it's emotional manipulation and all that stuff. But when you really trust someone, when you don't see them, man, it's deadly. It is, because, usually there's a little bit of shame involved with that somehow. I don't know why. Because the people that are doing this stuff are the ones that should, just, be bathing in shame for what they're doing. But you feel like you've betrayed yourself. How did I do it? How did I not see this? How did you should know better, because as a targeted individual, especially if you're experienced, you never want to trust anybody too much. That's definitely one of the protocols. Don't ever get your hopes up, man, in a way that's unrealistic for your scenario. You can have fun, you can hope, you can try to do this or that, but be careful. Be careful. They are, they're there. And the ones that you don't see, that's the one that's going to leave some tooth marks, and I've got them. So really the only advice I can give you is to form protocols, guard yourself, put boundaries around you and around your heart, be realistic about your situation. And remember that they're going to have a disguise, right? They're going to disguise themselves as someone who cares, or someone maybe even that needs your help. Or, I've the two pastors that I've run into, I never would have saw them coming. But if I would have used biblical criteria as far as what they believed, I would at least, had some warning, okay? There's a lot of people that profess to be Christians, and they'll say they got your back or whatever, or they care about you, or they talk about Jesus and so forth, and you would think that they would never do anything, but that's their disguise. And the Bible talks about that the workers of Satan masquerade as ministers of righteousness, because the devil himself masquerades as an angel of light, right? It's pretty scary. And if you don't know, biblical doctrine the way you should, it can be a weakness, right? And if people are engaging in, inconsistent behaviors and stuff like that, even if they pretend like they're your friend or whatever, if they're using the name of the Lord in vain and stuff like that, they could be manipulated at the very least. They might not be that infiltrator with that motive, but, stuff like that makes people vulnerable. And you have to be careful. You have to know where you are. You're in a world that has principalities, powers, demonic spirits. You have, a corrupt government that is doing all kinds of things. I'm not even going to get into that. And by the way, if you guys want to look at something interesting that goes along with what's happening with the New World Order and everything, look up the last interview with Larry McDonald And this guy got his airliner shot down by the Soviets, and he was gonna expose the communist agenda. Anyway, I just thought I'd put that in there, something to distract you, because there's some pretty good stuff. And he talks about the New World Order. That was back in 1983. So there's all kinds of things. I do that. I'll study to distract my. That's a good protocol. Try to keep yourself busy, but you have to be careful when you're dealing with people. Be realistic. Remember what you're dealing with. Remember where you are. And you can have hope. There are a lot of people that I think that experience this kind of thing, and my hope is that somehow I'm going to hook up with a couple of them, or at least one of them, and we can do this together. Because it sucks to be isolated, and that makes the targeted individual vulnerable. And that infiltrator is very dangerous. And I think it's probably more so, like I said, dangerous when the targeted individual starts to feel hopeful. And they start to kind of maneuver around some of this stuff, and their character gets built up. But the reality of your scenario is, behind you. You have a lot of traumatic stuff. You've had a lot of negative experiences. And what's the reality of that? When's it going to happen again? Right? And when you have that chain yanker, when you have the infiltrator remind you of something or trigger you in a way that, you could be out of balance, you could be dealing with a lot of stuff, or you could be just unrealistic in your expectations. And if you run into that, you're going to tumble down that rabbit hole of hopeless death, right? Because you never know what, that you're cruising, you're moving on along, and you're trying to fight the depression and the isolation and everything, but it's there, and that infiltrator will remind you that it is, right? Not necessarily that they'll just bring something up, but they could reach out and take a bite out of you. And if you're, not realistic about what's going on, it's going to be painful, and it's going to send you down into that hopeless spiral. So you got to be careful of that. You got to follow those protocols. Guys, be good to yourselves. Be safe.